Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something along the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. If you're enjoying the conversations here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening. Also, if you or someone you know like to come on the show and have a chat with me, you can find me on social media, because I'm probably the same place that you are. And the best way to find out what my handle is, if you go to isaacrlevin.com, you'll see a list of all the places that I'm at, and I'm at a lot of them. All right, with that out of the way, I'm looking forward to this conversation. This is somebody that I've been a fan of for a while. We actually met in person for the first time, and I kind of fanboyed out, and I'm excited to have another conversation with them a little bit longer and learn a little bit about their background. So my guest today is Helen Hou-Sandí. Helen, do you want to say hello? Introduce yourself.
Hello. Hi, everybody. I'm Helen. I have a long job title, I guess. I'm the staff software engineering manager for accessibility at GitHub. I also manage a little side thing at GitHub that we call Maintainer Tiny Wins. It's kind of an internal name, and I know it's made it out into the public. And we talked a bit about it at Universe, where I got to meet Isaac. And so that's what I do for my day job. I also happen to be one of the lead developers for the WordPress open source project. I'm still involved in that. So that's my computer world.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to, learning about the stuff like, the paper cuts thing, I think is like what you're talking about at GitHub. But like, I'm also kind of fascinated about the WordPress thing, because I think WordPress has been so much in our lives as technologists for, it feels like an eternity now. But I'd like to learn how you got started. When did you realize, Helen, that technology was the thing for you?
Yeah, it's like an up and down, really, for me. It's been my entire life has been messing with a computer, right? So there's one of those, like, how did you get started stories for me is when I want to say maybe 9 or 10. And my dad, who is a math professor, said, "Hey, I want to show you something cool on the computer." And what he showed me was how to make the onboard speaker. They have a name, like piezo or something. The little onboard speakers from the time where they were beige PC towers with a turbo button, right? So the little onboard speaker, and you could make it produce melodies, right? Mm-hmm. Because you could make it vibrate at a certain hertz. And so he showed me what turned out to be basic, and how to pass it hertz values and time values so that I could make it play a melody back to me. And for him, he was kind of teaching me a little bit about different tuning systems. Like, we can talk about that on instruments, as well as like how to understand timing, as well as like, here's a cool thing that you can do on the computer, right? And so I was pretty young, but then I was in a math and science high school. I did AP computer science. It was C++ at the time. I don't think it's C++ anymore. And then I started college, and I was a dual major in CS and music, because I was already kind of falling out of love with the computer, I think, despite, like sneaking computer time in the middle of the night and tying up the phone line. But I dropped CS after a semester. I'm not enjoying this. And I went on, I finished my undergrad. I did my master's in music, but then I needed health insurance is what really happened.
Sure.
I needed,
as we all
health
do.
Insurance. And at the music school, the music conservatory where I was, so I went to Eastman for my master's, and I had gotten to know some of they call themselves like the IT guys at the school. And so there's the web developer, and then the others who worked, in the various labs, because I worked in a student computer lab. But what that really meant was like restocking the printer paper and making sure that freshmen weren't doing dumb stuff on the computers during monitoring hours. And so I got to know them, and they're like, "You seem really handy with the computer. Why don't we show you how to make a web page for this thing that you're working on at school?" And so it's PHP. And PHP basically immediately made sense to me. I think some of it is because, like coming from C++ and then Java, it actually shares a lot of like syntax, right? And programming logic is programming logic. So it did make sense to me. And then CSS ended up being what really clicked for me. This the idea of like a presentation layer. Like you have strong semantics and then a presentation layer. And something about that like just immediately made sense to me. And I was like, whoa, actually, I kind of like this. And so after I finished grad school, they said, hey, we're actually hiring for another web developer at the school. And even though it's a mid-level job, and you'd have to like get up to speed really quick on the actual like programming technology part of it, the fact that you already know like the faculty and the staff at the school is a much harder thing to teach somebody. So why don't you apply, figure it out? So they hired me as a web developer at the music conservatory. And that's where it started really, was I realized, actually, this is a better job.
Sure.
Working as a musician is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And it's become much worse over the last 20-ish years as professorships have evaporated, right? Schools have moved more and more to adjunct models, which is, we don't get too heated about that, but I don't like that. I don't like that direction. And those sorts of things. And so moving to computers was like, you know what? I'm able to be at home. Well, at the time I worked in an office, but like I'm safe. I'm inside. I'm on the computer. I'm getting paid. I have insurance. Like things are good. And while I was there, we started using WordPress for like a little magazine type of site because, again, we were on PHP, MySQL, so WordPress made sense, right? It's like self-hosted free software. And in the process of doing that, I learned about what release cycles were, right? Because you have to keep track of what's coming next, what's new. And that's when I learned that WordPress is something called open source. And I said, what does that even mean? Right? Like, what do you mean by open source? And I read the 4 freedoms of open source and was like, I kind of love this.
Yeah.
I love the idea, right? Like as a user, it can't be taken away from me. I love the idea that you're supposed to like share and learn in the open, right? Like I really like that. And it is very similar to music. And yeah, and so that's where it came through, I think, was like I liked CSS,
Yeah.
and I still do, and I think people think that's a little funny, but it was really the open source part of it. And so I would have been about 23
Sure.
at the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, time of life.
There's a lot there. I mean, first, I think the first thing I want to ask, to go all the way back to like when you first, your dad was giving you the exercise of kind of getting the onboard PC speaker to make sounds. Like, did you ever get into like MIDI? Because I feel like that's like the evolution of that, right? Where it's like, okay, I'm making sounds with a computer or with some technology that somewhat resemble, I guess, classical music, or not classical music, but I guess instrumental music.
Yeah.
And I have a kid who's like very much into like video game music right now. Like we installed FL Studio on their machine. They're like building like these really cool loops, and they're learning like music concepts, like kind of, I guess, by osmosis, because they're trying to learn all these beats and all these things. So I guess like my question for you is that, and it kind of ties into your music thing too, is what are some of the correlations that you see between somebody who has a very solid understanding of the concept and some of the theory of music, and then people that have the same concept and theories of like computer science or modern computing?
Yeah. I was just talking to my dad about this last week. We had a little family trip, and my dad's question to me was about AI, actually. He was like, does it make you nervous, right? Like the classic question. And I told him, like, I don't worry about it personally, right? Because my whole job, my whole career around like, can you be good at problem definition?
Yeah.
Right? Like, can you actually... And music can be like this. So we can start with one parallel, right? Like the music's already composed. You already know what the outcome more or less is supposed to be.
Sure.
Right? And a lot of tech is like this. You don't have the score in front of you, but there's a pretty clear definition. You're supposed to have a pretty clear definition of like what the end state is supposed to be. And your job has to be how to break down the work that needs to get done in order for you to get there. And only you can really do that for yourself. Right? Like, yeah, you might have a PM who's like breaking things down into epics or, sprints or whatever structure you use. But realistically, day to day, you have to be able to break out the pieces that you need to get done in order to get to the goal that you have for whatever time period it is, right? And music is like that. Nobody can sit there with you practicing for you.
Yeah.
Right? Practicing happens on your own. And that is much the same with programming. Whether you're talking about coding or sitting there thinking about the problem, it's the same thing. You have to know how to drive that on your own. And I think that's really important. My kids do piano lessons. I don't expect them to become musicians. They might, I don't know, right? Like, who knows? But what I really want them to learn from that is like how to be disciplined.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And know that like you have to iterate, right? And like each day you can't cram learning music.
Sure.
It doesn't work that way. Right. And a lot of tech is like that. It's like you have to iterate, you have to be patient, you have to be able to build on what you did yesterday. I think that's huge. And the other like very literal parallel is it's a form of notation.
Yeah.
Right. So music is like a little bit more abstract, maybe, than a lot of programming, although you find programming languages that are more abstract. But you're talking about taking notation and being able to read it and translate it into how something is going to execute over time.
Yeah.
Right. And it may or may not be linear. Music is a little more linear than maybe programming is, depending on what you're doing with it. But I think that's a really strong one as well, is it gives you that ability to take a look at a different style of notation, right? Combine it all together and in your head be able to envision, right? How is this going to work over time?
Yeah, it's if you think about it, like I mean, music is math, right? And then computer science is math. Sure, you talk to somebody that might be like a jazz musician, and they're like, "Oh, there's no math involved here at all. Like it's all free form, it's more creative." But it's like, no, it's all math, right? But like same thing. I was having this conversation jokingly with a friend of mine who like is like a jazz, like they play jazz piano, and they were asking me about like tech because they don't really know much about tech, and they asked like what like they keep on carrying vibe coding, and I joked, I'm like, vibe coding is basically jazz, like it and like because the idea is that what, like to your point earlier, what the structure is, what the ideal output is, but how you get there is very, very different every single time, right? And that's that and they looked at me very confused, and I think they got it. They got it after a few seconds because it is kind of a crazy thing to think about. But I think one of the things that I love to hear from you, it's like the idea of putting the work in, right? Not to quote Malcolm Gladwell, but like the 10,000 hours, right? Like you put in the 10,000 hours into whatever you're going to be good at it, and you're going to master that thing, whether it's an instrument, whether it's tech. So I think my question for that is like, obviously today we have lots of shortcuts in tech, right? And I think, what are you to say to the folks that are like, oh, I don't need to go and get like a formal CS degree. I don't need to go to coding boot camp or spend hours and hours of learning online. I can just read a couple of docs and then put together a decent prompt, and now I'm an engineer.
Yeah, I mean, I really think so much of this comes down to like how well you know yourself.
Sure.
Right. And I do a lot when people say things like this. The first thing that comes to mind for me is, are you being honest with yourself about yourself? Right. And I think you have to start with really understanding how you specifically learn.
Yeah.
Right. So for some people, that is a degree program. For some people, it's a boot camp. For some people, it's on the job. Right. Like there are many different ways of learning. I think that they're all valid. We run into that social complications of like how seriously people take you, right? Depending on factors that you may not be in control of, right? So when we talk about things like, diversity or inclusion, let's say in tech, that's what we really get into, right? Is like, do people take me seriously, even though I have music degrees, because they make presumptions?
Sure.
Like positive presumptions,
sure,
right, about my skill set. And does that apply to other people of other formats? And the answer is no. I think we know that, even if we like sometimes don't want to believe it. So sometimes that also comes into play, right? It's like I need to get a degree so that people take me seriously. I think
Yeah.
that's a real thing too. But I think for that, it's, what do you mean by engineering? I think, I mentioned my dad asked me that question of like, does AI have you nervous? Does AI have people nervous about their jobs? I think there's definitely, I'm not about the like immediacy of my job, right? Like, will I still have a job because the AI is writing code? Yes.
Yeah.
I think the answer to that is very simply a yes. Then the question of, is my job, I'm already a manager, right, at this point, but if I went back to being an IC, I don't think I would want my job to be writing code all day anyway, right? But that is something that a lot of people don't like, right? As your career grows and changes in tech, sometimes as a software engineer, you end up in a role where the bulk of your day is not spent writing code. And for some people today, that is something they don't like.
Yeah.
And I understand that. But at the same time, for me, the code has always been a byproduct, honestly,
Yeah.
of what we're trying to accomplish, right? Like what's really important, problem definition, right? Like forward compatibility, backward compatibility. Like those are the things that are important to me. And the code is a byproduct of trying to get to those things. And so I'm already a little bit, I guess I was well positioned in some ways for this change in the sea, where we're maybe writing less code directly ourselves. But now, what I think we really have to work on in tech is review means.
Yeah.
This is what I keep thinking about, right? So, like, okay, is going to a boot camp going to make you a software engineer? I have no idea. It might or might not, right? It's really up to like what you do with it. But why do we even call it software engineering now instead of just like web developer or remember when everybody called us all web designers?
Or
You
full
were
stack.
doing
We're all full stack developers, right?
we're all full stack. That was even later. Like,
Yeah.
when I started out, it was always like, oh, you're a web designer. And it's like, no, you don't want me doing that. But sure, that's what you call everybody who does computer stuff. But if we really want to take this idea that like we want these engineering titles without engineering certification seriously, what does that actually mean? Right? It is something about craft. It is something about being disciplined about it. And I do think that what we actually need to see is more structure, more discipline, more thoughtfulness put into what does review mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Maybe the production of it is a little bit less meaningful. Maybe the production of code was never even that meaningful, right? I mean, we've already been in this world. The world of package managers is this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We've already let go of a lot of the elements of producing code ourselves. And so what does it mean to be able to effectively do review today? And I think that's where you really see the craft and maybe is more aligned with what engineering, in the certified sense means, right? That is much more bound to standards. And where do standards come from? Review, not production. So I think that'll be a really interesting thing to see if like we are able to collectively, right, like as a tech industry, adapt to that reality. Um, for me, it's on my mind, right? What do feedback and review look like, especially at volume? I think like that's if we want to talk about paper cuts for maintainers, that becomes one of the biggest challenges today, right? It was already challenging as an open source maintainer to keep up with intake, and now intake, like the people producing things for you to review as a maintainer, have much lower barriers,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But we don't have more capacity for these things that people are producing. So how do we do that?
Yeah. I've always subscribed to like the what tool is best fit for the job, like that sort of mantra of things. And I keep going back to it's like, yes, like the tools over time are changing. Like you talk to somebody like last week I talked to like the creator of PowerShell, right? And it's like we're talking about like the tools that existed when he was building PowerShell versus the tools that exist today. And that's not a very like large amount of time. It's like 30 years, I guess, 20 years.
Yeah.
And but like if you look at the grand scheme of things, like the tools in the last 10 years have changed drastically. right? Tools in the last 2 years have changed drastically. So the question is like, what tools can you pick out of the litany of tools to help you be more productive? And I've always found it fascinating how we've spent a lot of time trying to decide like what makes a developer or an engineer happy. And like there's all these studies, and it's like, okay, like we want to be, writing code more, or we want to have less meetings, or we want to like have less review. And it's like everybody's like, to your point, everybody's a bit differently. At the same time, we all need to understand that we're all in the same reality, and there needs to be compromise on all sides of it. So that's, I think, that at least what I've taken to this goes back to like the conversation you and your father probably had. It's like, am I worried about my job? I'm always worried about my job because I work in a very volatile space. But at the same time, do I worry about my ability to navigate this industry? Because I think that's what it really boils down to. Like at the end of the day, it's like, if something was to happen, or if I was to be unhappy, how likely am I to find something that makes me happy? Right? I think that's what it really boils down to. Because I think at the end of the day, we're all chasing like not being upset or dread having to start work on Monday. Like that's what we're all really chasing, right? I Go ahead. Did you have something to say to that?
No.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something. Sorry. You also said something like sort of like in your intro or your origin story, what I found that kind of scratches an itch for me, because I think that like, you and I are of a similar age. Like I was very like, my first like thing that I built was like a website. Like in high school, we were given a task like, okay, build a website on something you find interesting. This dates me. So like, I was a huge fan of the movie Gone in 60 Seconds with Nicolas Cage, and like the Shelby like Mustang was like the thing. So I built like a website about the Shelby Mustang, and I thought it was so cool. And then when I went to college, like this thing called MySpace was very popular, and like the idea of like customizing your MySpace pages to like whatever you want, right? That's what it triggered to me. It's like, oh, what are you capable of doing with technology? Because I've been a computer person like my entire life. Like I got very interested in computers at a young age, and when I got a computer, I couldn't let go of it. But like I never really got like the feedback loop until I started seeing like web stuff, right? Oh, I type in a couple of things in Notepad and I hit save, and now I have this thing that does stuff. Right? Like, was it like you mentioned this a little bit earlier with CSS? Was it specifically like that? I can save something and something moves, like that immediate feedback loop, which really rang true for you?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It was all about, I guess, instant gratification, right? But it's kind of the same way that for me, specifically, I'm a pianist, right? And we also talk about this when starting learning music. Why do people start with the piano so often? And a big part of it is because you can make the sound without additional work.
Yeah.
Right? Like imagine a child trying to blow correctly on the trumpet, right? Or like hold a violin correctly. Those are very frustrating when you're a child. It's perhaps worth working through that frustration, right? But to get started, to really understand like what is sound, what is music, what is rhythm, the piano ends up being your easiest starting point because you just push the button, right? It's the instant gratification. And I think for me, and I think about this often, is like, how different would it have been if I had started like more formal computer training in something that wasn't a compiled language, right? In something that wasn't so strict about typing, importing libraries, learning all those details. What if you started with a little website project, right? I had one in middle school, but at that time it was Flash, and Flash was also immensely frustrating. Yeah. So it's, I don't think that I really got to have that experience until I was, finishing grad school. And, at that point I was, maybe a little behind. That's fine. But it was absolutely that. It was like my AIM profile back in the day, you could find it locally. And open it in Notepad and really tinker with the HTML, because AIM profiles had a 1K limit. And if you use the editor, it would put in font tags, right, and all of that. And so you could go into the HTML yourself, strip out as many redundant tags as possible to fit more into your AIM profile. And I always thought that was fun, but I
Yeah.
never thought of it as like programming, because programming became, can you write a tic-tac-toe in the command
Yeah.
line,
Yeah.
right? And so, yeah, once I came back and, CSS had become a thing, it was like, whoa, no, actually, this is great. This is amazing. I can change stuff. PHP is lovely for this. Everybody hates on PHP, but PHP is great because it's loosey, because it's forgiving, right? You can try things and it just like shows up in a web page, and that's really cool. Yeah, and just like a lot more fulfilling. You mentioning your one of your kids doing video game music. My son has done this too, my older one, through Make Code Arcade. I'm
Yeah.
not like plugging it or anything. I thought that was really cool that he was like, oh, you can make your own music. So he like made his own music, and he made his own little sprite for a little, it's like
Yeah.
a jumping game that he made. And I always think that's really cool. Like when we leave kids in particular to just explore, right? Not give them a task, but just like, here's a thing, go try it,
Oh yeah.
right? And we miss that a lot. I think so many things today, like even thinking about stuff like boot camp. Um, Again, like if you're a person who needs structure to learn, that's cool.
Yeah.
I'm one of those people. I have to get in there and
Yeah.
try it. And I think, I'm not a school person, but for me, it was definitely like learning on the job. But then learning on the job means knowing where you can do that. And I think that's something that I see as a manager is people who they've kind of like romanticized the idea of getting into tech. And
Sure.
so they're trying to
Yeah.
get into tech. And it's like, where the best jobs are to get started are little in-house jobs
Yeah.
at like a university or a publisher, or, like where you want to be today is logistics and shipping. That's where
Sure.
you want to be today. I'm not even
Yeah.
kidding. So
Yeah.
like go work in-house at a place like that. And that's where you really get to learn by being hands-on. You don't have so much of this like honestly this kind of wild pressure that we're under in the tree, right? So
Yeah.
everything is like growth mindset. And it's like, can I just like chill?
Yeah. Yeah. My first job was working in an insurance company, right? Like building
Yeah.
a websites for an insurance company. And uh, I think about the problems that we were trying to solve then, and it feels so quaint. It's like, oh, like, I'm trying to make it so like this little widget shows up like on somebody's billing page or whatever it is, right? And now I think about some of the problems I've had to solve, like working at a tech company, and I'm just like, man, like, can't I just go back to just like not to oversimplify, but like some forms over data exercise, right?
Yeah.
Um, and which I think it like is quaint, but it's like also to your point, like the entire backbone of like technology in general is built on random companies trying to just like bring value to their customers with technology, right? And in tech, like there's this meta piece where it's like, oh, we have to build the right tools for the developers to be successful. It's like 7 layers down from like actually like affecting like you and I as the end user, right? And sometimes it's very, very hard to see that, when you're trying to like ship features for some product or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's, I think the things that I work on at GitHub have ended up aligning really well with the things that I want to be doing. I both feel fortunate, but also, you do have some control
Yeah.
over your destiny, right? Like it is still, it's a company, it's a corporation, right? All of that. But I think for me, it's really clear, like the place that I want to be is having much more of like a direct impact on users. And what I really love are the small changes, right, that make a big difference. So paper cuts
Yeah.
is absolutely part of that. Accessibility is also that, right? Like accessibility, there's many parts to that work, especially at a large company. You have like supporting your internal customers in that sense, right? Of like, how do we provide you the infrastructure, the testing, et cetera, that you need in order to build accessible things in your product. But then there's also like what we ship to users, right? To make it better for users a little bit at a time. And accessibility is often kind of by definition that, where everything is iterative.
Yeah.
Right. And everything is like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, because every single person uses their computing devices differently.
Yeah.
right? And there's no such thing as perfect. And it's really hard in accessibility because, you do it because you care.
Hmm.
And because you care, you can get really caught up in like, I want to fix it for everybody. I want it to be
Yeah.
right for everybody. And one of the first things you have to remember is there is no everybody,
Yeah.
right? And all we can do is really remain focused on improving things bit by bit over time, right? And that is its own type of success. It doesn't need to be one big splashy thing. It needs to be. We have to show that commitment over time. That's actually what's the most important. And I think this has come into play working on these maintainer tiny wins or paper cuts as well, which is both that, these are things we want to make better, right? We are directly listening to open source maintainers who use GitHub, I almost said WordPress, who use GitHub, and taking that feedback and it's not necessarily like obeying what somebody says, right?
Sure.
Because like working at the scale of GitHub is often terrifying,
Sure.
honestly.
Sure. That's fair.
But we want to hear what those problems are and look for ways that we can solve that in a way that, you know, keeps the platform healthy, that doesn't create a product that's like boxing both ourselves and users into like bad corners. So we've done some things are feel bigger. They have been more work, but they've ranged from making it easier to do conflict resolution in the web interface. Because previously it was like manually deleting,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
angle
Yeah. Yeah.
brackets.
Hmm.
Now we've got the buttons. All the way to most recently, we released settings for you to be able to turn off or restrict pull requests on the repo level. And this is actually a part of supporting maintainers, open source maintainers, doing open source in ways that suit them, right? I think we have a tendency to conflate open source with open process,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to. I do believe in the ethos, and I do believe in ecosystems and communities. It's not that those things are not things that I believe in. It's that I don't believe that you have to
Yeah.
in order for a project to be open source, right? And you don't have to do it on GitHub either, right? Like, yeah, of course, we would love for you to run your whole
Sure. Sure.
development lifecycle on GitHub, of course. But realistically, when we think about open source maintainers, we want to support being able to run your projects the way that you need to,
Yeah.
whether temporarily or permanently, right? So those are the kinds of things that are really exciting for me. Is like we're able to do things that are from a technical perspective, like relatively small to execute on, but that we're able to deliver directly to users who need it, right? Including ourselves. And through that, also kind of rebuild trust, right? In that, like GitHub can ship things. We can ship things. We can ship things often, and we can listen, right? And
Yeah.
we can hear, and kind of prove that because, yeah, a lot of the work underneath to support these things that everybody relies on, very unglamorous, very difficult. I mean, can you imagine like any change that you make to something like actions
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
huge
Yeah.
by definition, right? And that can be really hard. And it's really hard for those teams too. They feel like, nobody's appreciating my work. All I hear about is complaints because of, some outage or like, some bug that happened. And it's like, yeah, those things happen too. And that is what happens when you work at scale is like the complaints are louder and more frequent, right? But you also have to kind of come back to being able to remember like we are overwhelmingly the tool that people
Yeah.
use. And there's a reason for that, right? And we're not always going to hear the positive.
Yeah. I think the thing about accessibility, to kind of go back to what you're saying about, you know, trying to fix everything for everybody, it resonates with me a lot because I think that the number one issue that I think that accessibility has a problem with is that it's completely feedback driven, right?
Mm,
In the effect that, like, if you're building something like net new, I'm building this new product, I don't know how people are going to react to it. Yes, there are some things like from an accessibility perspective that need to get added, right? Like, is it going to be available for people with different abilities and things like that, right? Like those sort of accessibility things. But you don't know until you get feedback from people who are actually using it, like what other accessibilities need to be added to it. So it's always thought of as like a secondhand thing. Like I always joke, it's like, what are the few things that get added on to like the end of a product or a feature lifecycle? It's the security of it. How are we going to figure out the infrastructure scaling? What does the performance look like? Accessibility. Like there's like a bucket of like 5 or 6 things that like once you've actually like gotten to the point of like, okay, this thing's about ready to ship, let's add on like the things that are quote unquote needed, right? So my question for you after that little diatribe is, what is the most effective way to ensure that we're thinking about accessibility like early on in that life cycle, knowing that it's going to change the second you hit ship?
Yeah, there are there are many things to it, right? It is funny. Do you think about it now or later, especially like in early stages of like a product or a company? For a place like GitHub, it is different because it's large. And I will say WordPress faces the same thing, right? Large market share, large usage. Once you get to that point and you have public sector users, so governments, schools, you actually also have regulations that you have to abide by. So there's a compliance angle as well. So that often drives maybe the baseline, what we expect from you as you're building, right? But so much of what we call compliance or conformance, I guess is a formal term for it, really boils down to, did you write semantic HTML? This is something that I feel like has really gotten lost over the last, I don't know, it's been at least 10, maybe 15 years at this point, where we've really kind of, HTML has become a byproduct, the same way that I often think of code as a byproduct, but HTML seems to have become a byproduct. And it's like, no, HTML has to remain the foundation of what we're building here, at least for the web, right? And, almost a little bit horrifyingly to me, but also like I'm very pragmatic. So it's like, all right, if this is what it is, and then so it'll be. People have started to pay more attention to semantics, right? HTML structure, descriptive, like semantic class names versus like only using utility classes. People started paying attention to this again. Why? Because of LLMs.
Yeah.
And I find that kind of frustrating, right? That baseline premise is like, we're going to care more about how the computer consumes than how a human consumes, right? That is very frustrating to me just on a personal level, right? Like what are your values? What do you care about? I care about the people using the silly little magical thinking rock, right? And so I want to enable them. I don't care about whether the magical thinking rock can do it, but if it benefits both, then so be it, right? But that's what we have to really think about, is like, we have to not forget the basics. Maybe this is whatever the AI is producing, we have to be able to get back into it and say, listen, we still need good structure here. The structure has to be there, both for the machine, but also for the users. And if you really think about it, like with accessibility in the, in the conformance sense, right? And like why we call it accessibility, right? There's like a legal definition behind it. What we're talking about, how assistive technologies can be used by a user on your digital properties, right? So like, let's talk about the web. We're talking about assistive technologies. That means screen readers, right? Like maybe somebody's got like a Braille translator. I think that's much less common, but that happens. But screen readers, alternative pointing devices, right? Like people who can't use a mouse, right? Or people who use like eye tracking to do those things. What is assistive technology? And then isn't the LLM, like, isn't AI and LLMs, aren't they their own form of assistive technologies?
Sure. Yeah.
Right? And so perhaps we should have been caring this whole time, because we're talking about writing code well. Whether you're directly writing it yourself or not, you have to know, what is semantic HTML? What does that look like? Because that underpinning gets you a lot further than you realize, right? Because like if everything's a div and all of your class names are things like box, right? Or just like a jumble of letters because you've allowed it to be generated, that gives nobody more information.
Yeah.
And you know who else it blocks? It blocks people who might become web developers or open source contributors later, because we've also killed the ability to view source and mess with things.
Yeah.
Right? Like we've really taken away so much of this in our pursuit of, XYZ as software engineers. Like we got asked in WordPress once why we ship the source maps in build, and it's like,
Why
how else are
wouldn't
people
you?
supposed to
Yeah, why
learn?
wouldn't you? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I guess the build part not, but like we still do it, and people are like, why? And it's like, how else are people supposed to learn?
Yeah. Yeah, I struggle with like modern web development, maybe because I'm old man yelling at the sky or whatever, but I mean I think that, you know, as somebody who saw and actually like had to open up a text editor and type out bracket HTML bracket head bracket title, like all of that, right? It type out by hand. Like I didn't have tooling for this, or the tooling that I had wasn't great. And I feel like over the last 10 years, we have solely cared more about tooling and less about output, right?
Yes.
And I think now we're getting to this point. I was having this conversation with somebody literally earlier today about like, do we care about tools anymore? Do we care about the programming languages, or do we care only about the output? Because like there could be a defense that's like, in 5 years, I know that's a crazy amount of time in the future with how things are going, but it's like, if all the code is being generated by LLMs, and a lot of the review is being generated by LLMs, and all of the other things, like if agents that are doing all of this stuff in the SDLC, and your job as an engineer is to provide the inputs and validate the outputs, the tools don't matter anymore. So we've spent so much time in tech, like building these abstraction layers on top of bracket HTML, bracket head, bracket title, bracket body, right? That now it almost seems like we built them just to get to the point where we don't need them anymore. And I'm curious as to your thoughts is like, in this world, specifically about tech and maybe open source to an extent, it's like, how much is the idea of like, do we actually care about the individual pieces of the SDLC and how LLMs play a part of them versus I just care about, as an engineer, I know the problem statement, so I can provide the input in a way the black magic rock or whatever you said, the shiny magic rock could comprehend it, to being able to validate it.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I do think a lot of it is contextual, right? Like at what scale are you operating, right? So if you're talking about like a little tool that you want to use for yourself, slide code away,
Yeah.
right? Do you even need to validate it? Do you need to review it? I don't know, maybe not, right? But for something like a GitHub, something like a WordPress, I think it's a valuable tool to help you in any number of ways, but you have to become even stronger in how you're able to read and review code, right? Because at this scale, you have your responsibility to your users, right? But also like the unintended effects outside of what maybe the machine put together for you. And so for the human, it becomes much more about, I think of it as unlocking, right? For me, can I use this generation of tools to reduce a different type of toil for me?
Sure.
Because that's what they all are at the end of the day, right? We're trying to reduce our toil, reduce our annoyance. And I never found like writing HTML to be, frustrating. You know what it is? What is frustrating to me as not really a Rails person? I can read it. GitHub still has a lot of GitHub is still Ruby on Rails.
Sure.
And I'm not a Rails person. And navigating Rails when you're not a Rails person, anybody who's a Rails person listening to this is already laughing, I'm sure, because there's so much magic in the way that it works. And what has really helped me is being able to say, like, to ask this robot how to find something.
Yeah.
Right? How do I trace how this thing works?
Yeah.
Where the heck did these arguments and this magic method come from? I have not one clue because it's Rails doing Rails stuff. And yeah, you can ask a peer too, right? But there's something nice about asking a computer that probably isn't going to judge you.
Sure.
Or at least you're probably not going to know. And so I like that part. I like using it to explore. I like using it to spike out new things. I think that's been fun. And also, again, the tedium. Like for accessibility at GitHub, there are many things that we have to maintain that are automations, right? And that's, helpers for other teams to catch things, for us to monitor things, whatever. And for like the program side, that manages like conformance, right, and reports and all of that, how they can do those things. And it's been a huge help in getting those kinds of tasks done that are really easy to like let fall off the stack of priorities, right? Every company is guilty of this. You've got the big thing, and then you have all the small things that do still need to
Sure.
get done somewhere in there, but you keep letting them fall off the pile, right? Humans do it, big companies do it, small companies do it, I'm sure. And it's been helpful for those too, right? Where like for me as a manager, I'll have, a couple minutes in between meetings, right? Something like that. And that's long enough for me to like assign Copilot to an issue, pick a model, and write like maybe a short additional prompt. And it's enough time to at least kick off a task. And then the next time I have a few minutes, I can go see, what did it do with that? Is it a good enough start? Is it total trash? That happens sometimes. But then the skill comes back to, are you able to effectively read code?
Yeah.
Are you able to effectively navigate an unfamiliar code base? Often these are in areas that I've not looked at before or in a while. How can you as a human still like get up to speed quickly, and have confidence that you're reviewing something effectively? And how do you do review, right? Like, do you ask a lot of questions? Are you trying to trace through large parts of the history? Where I always get lost doing code review, again, because I've been working in large pre-existing code bases, a lot of my time goes into essentially Git blame,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I go doing some code archaeology. I get into the blame. I start reading old issues just to understand, like, okay, I see the change to this line. The change looks good. What I want to understand is, why was that line like that in the first
Yeah.
place? Right?
Yeah.
Like I look at that and I go, ooh, why was it like that before? I'm glad you're changing it now. That part looks good. But I want to understand how we ended up there.
Yeah.
Right? Was it an honest mistake, or was it, a trade-off that we made in the past because, oh, it turns out there's like some third order effect over here that we didn't think about. Right. And I think like that's where we all will have to get better, um, in this world,
Yeah.
right?
The only problem with get blame is that when you get blame and it's your name, like,
It's always me.
yeah, it's like, oh no, like, what did I do? Where did I go wrong? But I think the thing that you said about, being able to effectively navigate code bases that you don't, or that you might not have like a full grasp on, which I think most of us in software do. Like, there's not very many people, they built one thing, they built the whole damn
Right.
thing, right?
Right.
But I think, one of the things that I've been struggling with a lot in this regard, it's like if you go down the path of iterating with with an agent, like the you're not really looking at the code, you're trying to figure out the best way to ask the question or the best way to
Mhm.
provide the feedback, which is a very important skill that I think honestly not a lot of engineers have, right?
Yep.
Because we've been
Would agree.
very capable of understanding the problem statement in our head and then just putting our fingers to the keyboard and not being able to articulate it out. And I had a friend joke a few months ago. That's what a PM is for. Like a PM's job is to like take the the goal of the business and translate it into something that I can use as input, right? And then validate that output, right? And if you're expecting engineers to be able to write in human syntax the problem statement, even though it's probably not really well thought out in their head, but they know it's like, oh, I got to write a for loop here, and then I have to use this sort of algorithm, and then I got to do this. Like, you can't tell that to an LLM because an LLM will just be like, okay, I'm just going to do exactly what you told me.
Yep.
So I think my question is that, you know, what is the balance in your opinion between, you know, iterating with the agent and having the agent try to fix the issue and just going in there and say, oh, I know what's going on here. I just need to, like, instead of this for loop, I need to have it be a while loop and maybe something else, like things that you could easily accomplish maybe in a few hours as an engineer versus trying to, I guess, massage your prompt to get an LLM to do it.
Yeah, for me, I think it's been. I am enjoying, honestly. Like, it's frustrating some days, but I'm enjoying being challenged
Yes.
on how well I'm able to describe something, right? Like, I often at GitHub, like, I'm very spoiled, frankly, because I'm surrounded by these very smart, like terrifyingly smart people. And so you can give them sort of this like half-assed instruction and they'll get it.
Yeah.
And they'll go with it. Right. And the LLM, I mean, they've gotten better in ways that are a little bit scary to me sometimes, but like, no, they don't handle it when you're like, oh, I just kind of need it to whatever, right? Like they don't, an LLM is not going to be able to manage that. And I'm definitely a very classic lazy user of technology. Like I just want the freaking thing to work and leave me alone, especially because it's my job. So outside of my job, I have like no patience for devices, for the machine. And so I can be very like terse when I'm like, just can you just freaking do that? And I think for me also, when I mentioned earlier that I have like a few minutes in between meetings or something else that has to get done. And so for me, yeah, I'm more apt to try to reprompt, right? Or give the machine more instructions and then come back later and see how it's done. They are starting to do better. I guess this is advanced context and all of that. I definitely initially felt very frustrated by LLM usage because I would ask it to, iterate on what had just happened and it would lose the plot. Very quickly and wander off and start doing absolute nonsense. They've gotten better. And so that has become somewhat more right. Like, for us, we're using GitHub, of course, for the most part. And so for me, it's like leaving code review comments and being like, Copilot, like, this is nonsense. Like, can you redo that? And it tends to do a better job. Again, like this model dependent and all of that, but it's doing better. So I'm enjoying that part, right? And I'm hoping that it ladders into being a better coworker, a better collaborator, a better leader, right? To be able to express myself better. More formal, like in a written format, especially like at a fully remote company, like, yeah, we all have to practice describing things in writing more. So like I said, I think I'm a little spoiled because we're all remote. So people at GitHub do tend to be better at written descriptions of what they need to get done, right? But yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those things where, when I talk to my kids too, right? It's like, can I use AI for homework? And it's like, I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to, but also like,
you're gonna
you
can use AI in your job. Like that's the biggest thing is like, okay, I understand the value in learning, but also it's like, the typewriter was created because the idea of writing by hand was considered obscene, right? At some point in time. And then it's like, oh, why would we type on a typewriter if we had like a computer that we could type? We don't have to like throw a piece of paper away right? So it's like technology has provided us the ability for, I guess, to your, use your phrase, like reduce the toil. I will say this about prompting. This is my recommendation to anybody in tech. Go and find somebody that works in education if you need help with prompts. Like my wife is in education, my wife's a teacher. And she uses ChatGPT all the time for like everything. ChatGPTs our life. It's great. But at the same time, I'm like, okay. You look at the prompts that she writes, and I tell you what, like she'll write a very, very big prompt to get a very small output, but it's exactly what she wants. And I think that there is a skill set in knowing exactly how to talk, and this is just going to be the most probably inappropriate way to say talking to a child, because these LLMs, they have no context for the most part unless you provide it, or it's in their data set, and you have to explain a lot. And it's similar to teaching a kindergartner or a first grader. You have to explain a lot to get what you want. So I've actually learned something from my wife as a part of my work. Like, okay, well, I can't 2-sentence YOLO get the exact output I want. Right. And that's when, like, that's always that was my first struggle playing with these things. It's like, okay, I know what I want. and I just like define it kind of what in my head, and then I give it to it and it gives me this output. I'm like, no, like to your point, like this is absurd. What are you doing here? And then you have to have a conversation with like it's a human being, and then you kind of lose the plot, right?
Yeah.
So uh, in all of that saying, as we wrap up, like, as a part of your two main areas of focus in tech with what you do at WordPress and what you're doing at GitHub, like, what are some of the things that you're paying attention to going forward? Is it, extended context for LLMs? Is it, I guess, the soft skills of tech, where it's like how we work better together, all of those sort of cliche phrases? Like, what are the things that, in your experience, to go all the way back, you were saying a bit earlier about like teaching somebody an instrument on the piano. I can take any person to the piano and teach them hot cross buns in 15 minutes. What is the tech equivalent to that in the future or going forward?
Yeah, I really do think it comes back to how can you clearly communicate what you want, right? Whether that's prompting or talking to another person, I think that it ends the same skill set. You can probably be more patronizing to the computer than to another person. But it's kind of the same skill set, right? Like, are you clear on what it is that you're trying to accomplish? And I think so often we're not. This is a human condition. I'm not like critical. It's just how we are as people. Like we're all very like, I don't even really know what it is that I'm looking for. And that's what we have to be better about and more disciplined about is, how can I be clear with myself on what I'm even looking for and translate that,
Yeah.
And make it into something that can be communicated. I think for open source in particular, we really have to remember this is, if we believe in the longevity of our things, right, as open source, and in some ways, open source is inherently that, whether you're actively working on it or not, by being open source, it lives out there forever, right? Yeah. And so how do you leave artifacts behind that make sense to whoever is doing the next thing, whether that's you 6 months from now or somebody, 5 years from now? Who knows, right? You don't know. And we don't, we don't want to over optimize for unknowns, but I think we could all be better about being really clear about like what it is that we're trying to accomplish. What is the problem space we're looking at? I know in WordPress, there are places where we do it really well, and there are places where we don't do it as well. But trying to lean more on over communication, right? And I had somebody ask me this literally yesterday, not about a WordPress thing, about something at GitHub, which was, how do we manage this? It's like some crosswork that's going on, and so how do we do this? And it feels like there's a lot of burden because we have to over communicate, and it's like we have to stop thinking of that as a burden.
Yeah,
I think is what it really is, right? Like, what is? Maybe it's not. We're not going to find like joy in the thing, but like it's not a burden to communicate what we're working on, and maybe some of it is like changing how we think about that, right? Review is not a burden. Communication is not a burden. Actually, that is what makes us who we are. That's what makes us expert practitioners. That's what makes us human, right? That's what makes us right? So like I actually talk about them not as soft skills versus hard skills. I talk about them as professional skills versus academic skills.
Sure.
And I think that's, to me, like that's how we can really think about that in the work framework, right? Like what makes you a professional and not a student? It's how you communicate, right? How you relate to others. Yeah. That's what makes you a professional. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I'm having this conversation with my kids all the time. It's like, do you want to be a functioning member of society? You got to talk to me differently.
Yep.
Helen, this conversation has been awesome, and I want to thank you so much for the time. And it's been great to, learn about your backstory and learn about how you're thinking about some of the things. So I think they're really top of mind for me, and I think a lot of the people listening to this. For folks that are not paying attention to what Helen's doing, there's a bunch of places you can find it. I see that you blog, which I think is great, and you're on social media a little bit too. Couple places you can find her. One of them is at your blog, so helen.blog. But also you can find her on social media. I think you have your handle basically locked down across all the places. So Helen Hou-Sandí, right? You're basically they're everywhere, right?
Yep.
So that's
Yeah, except
HELEN.
GitHub. I'm just
Oh, you're
yep.
just you're yeah. Well, I mean that's
Yeah,
because you got
GitHub.
like
Just
the
help.
OG, like you have to have the OG. I was thinking about this when I was before I started talking to you. It's like Helen.blog is a pretty good domain.
Oh,
Like I was like, man, that's a
it
good one.
is.
That's a good one.
It
But
is.
you can find her HELENHOUSANDI. That's like I think that's what your X handle is, and I think you're that on a couple
Mhm.
of the places also.
Yep.
Before we sign off, my friend, do you have any parting words?
I just want everybody to really think, I guess,
Oh
right?
man,
Like we can vibe code, we can have fun, but
yeah,
I want us to make sure that we still put thought into how we're doing things, right? Be
yeah.
thoughtful, think about the context, think about the time, think about the place. And we can worry. I'm not discounting anybody's worries. I'm not discounting, how people are feeling about, the way things have been changing, the way things go. Open source as well, right? Like what we're facing there. But if we really take a moment to step back and think and not just react, I think we'll all be better for it.
I could not agree more. That's great. And again, I want to thank you so much for your time. I want to thank for the folks that were watching this live and the folks listening to the future. My name is Isaac Levin. This has been Coffee and Open Source. And if you want to have a chat, you know where to find me, isaacr11.com. Also, be sure to like and subscribe and share with your friends. And I hope you have a great day. From my friend Helen, hope you enjoy. Take care.
Thank you.